My beloved friends, as I stand before you today, my heart is filled with profound emotion and deep understanding of the journey we're about to embark upon together. I come to you not as a distant scholar speaking from the heights of academic abstraction, but as a fellow traveler on life's intricate path, sharing ancient wisdom that remains startlingly relevant to our modern struggles. Today, we explore one of life's most essential yet challenging arts, the sacred practice of saying no. In this age of constant connectivity and endless demands, where the boundaries between work and life have become increasingly blurred, where technology keeps us perpetually available, and where the pressure to be everything to everyone has never been greater, learning to say no isn't just a skill, it's a survival imperative. Yet, I see in your eyes the same hesitation, the same inner conflict that has challenged humans throughout history. I feel in your hearts the weight of guilt, the fear of disappointment, the anxiety of potential rejection that comes with setting boundaries. Let me share with you what Socrates, that wisest of ancient teachers, understood so well, when he proclaimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He wasn't just speaking of philosophical contemplation. He was urging us to question the unconscious patterns that govern our lives. And isn't our habit of saying yes when our soul whispers no one of the most damaging patterns we've inherited? Think back to those moments when your heart felt heavy with the weight of commitments you never truly wanted to make. Recall those times when you felt your energy scattered like precious pearls cast before the endless demands of others. I see you nodding, for this experience is universal. As Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, observed, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And oh, how much of our precious life force do we waste in reluctant yeses? The brilliant Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, but today I want to speak about the banality of boundary violation, those small, seemingly insignificant moments when we betray our own needs, our own truth, our own sacred space. Each time we say yes, when our whole being yearns to say no, we participate in a subtle form of self-betrayal. As Martin Buber would remind us, we turn ourselves from subjects into objects, from into hit. But take heart, my dear friends, for this moment, this very moment as my words reach your ears and touch your soul, marks the beginning of a profound transformation. This is not merely a lecture, it is an invitation to freedom, an initiation into the art of sacred self-respect. Imagine, if you will, your life as a magnificent garden. Every time you say yes when your heart whispers no, you allow someone to trample through your carefully tended flowers, to pick your fruits before they're ripe, to reshape your landscape according to their desires rather than your design. From the depths of ancient wisdom to the findings of modern neuroscience, we discover a profound truth. Our capacity to say no is intimately connected with our ability to truly say yes. When we fail to honor our boundaries, we don't just diminish ourselves, we diminish our capacity to fully engage with life itself. Recent research reveals that chronic people pleasing actually alters our brain's stress response system, creating patterns of anxiety and depletion that ripple through every aspect of our existence. Let me share with you the story of Sarah, a brilliant executive I worked with recently. Like many of us, she prided herself on being the go-to person, the one who could always be counted on. Her calendar was a maze of meetings, her inbox overflowed with requests, and her phone buzzed constantly with messages demanding immediate attention. One day, during a particularly overwhelming week, she found herself in the emergency room with severe anxiety symptoms. This crisis became her wake-up call. Through our work together, Sarah discovered that her inability to say no wasn't just about time management. It was about her fundamental belief that her worth was tied to her utility to others. This revelation leads us to a crucial understanding. Our difficulty with boundaries often stems from our deepest beliefs about ourselves and our place in the world. Consider this profound paradox. In our desperate attempts to maintain connection through constant availability and endless yeses, we actually diminish our capacity for genuine connection. When we're perpetually overextended, we cannot be fully present. When we're constantly saying yes from a place of obligation rather than authentic choice, we're not truly giving, we're surrendering. This is what the great philosopher Martin Heidegger might have called inauthentic existence, a way of being that betrays our deepest truth. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern psychology has come to validate. We cannot control the demands others place upon us, but we have absolute sovereignty over our response. Every request, every demand, every expectation that comes our way presents us with a choice point, an opportunity to either honor or betray our own truth. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome yet student of wisdom, wrote in his private meditations about the importance of maintaining inner boundaries, even when the whole world demanded his attention. From an evolutionary perspective, our struggle with boundaries reflects an ancient survival mechanism. Our ancestors depended entirely on group acceptance. Being cast out meant almost certain death. That primal fear still lives in our nervous system, making every no feel like a dangerous act of separation. Yet paradoxically, it is precisely this capacity to differentiate ourselves, to stand in our truth while maintaining connection, that marks our evolution as conscious beings. The great Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh spoke often about interbeing, the profound interconnectedness of all life. Some misinterpret this teaching as a call to abandon all boundaries. But look closer at nature. A cell without a membrane cannot function. A nation without borders cannot govern. A self without boundaries cannot truly connect. The art lies in finding the right degree of permeability, like a healthy cell membrane, allowing necessary exchanges while maintaining essential integrity. In our modern world, this ancient challenge has taken on new dimensions. Technology has created what sociologists call perpetual accessibility, a state where we're expected to be constantly available, infinitely responsive. Each notification, each message, each email represents a tiny boundary crossing. Left unchecked, these microscopic invasions accumulate into a massive erosion of our personal space and time. Recent research in neuroscience reveals something remarkable. Every time we override our authentic no, we activate the brain's stress response system. Over time, this creates a pattern of chronic stress that affects everything from our immune system to our emotional resilience. Conversely, when we honor our boundaries, we strengthen neural pathways associated with self-regulation and emotional well-being. This isn't just psychology, it's biology. As we begin to understand the profound implications of boundary setting, we must also acknowledge its broader social and cultural dimensions. In many societies, especially for women and marginalized groups, saying no can carry real risks to relationships, to professional advancement, even to personal safety. This is where our personal practice intersects with collective liberation. Every time we say a conscious no, we create space not just for ourselves, but for others who might be watching and learning. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir understood that freedom comes with responsibility, first to ourselves, then to others. When she wrote about the ethics of ambiguity, she wasn't just talking about grand moral choices. She was speaking about the daily decisions that shape our existence. Every yes or no is an ethical choice, a statement about what we value, what we believe, and who we are becoming. As we conclude this first exploration, I invite you to sit with a profound question. What would become possible in your life if you started honoring your no as much as your yes? What dreams, what projects, what relationships might flourish in the space created by conscious boundaries? What parts of yourself might come alive in the fertile soil of self-respect? As we delve deeper into this exploration, let me address the fear that I see flickering in your eyes. Many of you are thinking, but what about my relationships? What about the people who depend on me? These are valid concerns, born of your beautiful capacity for love and connection. Yet, as Carl Jung so profoundly understood, our relationships can only be as healthy as our relationship with ourselves. When he spoke of individuation, the process of becoming our true selves, he wasn't suggesting isolation, but rather authentic connection based on genuine boundaries. Consider for a moment the paradox that Friedrich Nietzsche illuminated when he wrote about the will to power. Many misunderstand this concept as mere domination over others, but its deeper truth lies in mastery over oneself. Your no is not an act of aggression. It is an assertion of your will to become who you truly are. Every time you honor your boundaries, you participate in this sacred act of self-creation. Let me share with you 3 fundamental truths about the art of saying no, each anchored in centuries of philosophical wisdom. First, as Immanuel Kant might have observed, your no must become a categorical imperative. If everyone said yes to everything, the world would collapse into chaos. Your boundaries are not just personal preferences, they are necessary conditions for a functioning society. Secondly, your no creates space for your authentic yes. When you clear away the underbrush of unnecessary commitments, you create space for what truly matters. Think of it, how many opportunities for genuine connection, creative expression, or personal growth have you missed because your life was cluttered with reluctant yeses? Thirdly, and perhaps most profoundly, saying no is an act of love, not just self-love, but love for the whole. As Spinoza understood, we are all interconnected, part of a greater whole. When you maintain healthy boundaries, you contribute to the health of the entire system. Your no creates ripples of authenticity that touch everyone around you. Let me guide you through a practical understanding of these truths. Consider Maria, a dedicated teacher who found herself overwhelmed by the constant demands of her students, colleagues, and administration. She felt guilty about not being available 24/7, about not taking on every extra project, about sometimes needing time for herself. Through our work together, she discovered that her effectiveness as a teacher actually increased when she began setting clear boundaries. Maria learned to say, "I'm fully present for my students during school hours, but I need my evenings for rest and renewal." She discovered that by protecting her personal time, she came to class with more energy, more creativity, more genuine presence. Her students learned not just academic subjects, but also the valuable lesson that self, respect, and self-care are essential parts of a healthy life. This brings us to a crucial understanding about the relationship between boundaries and presence. When we're perpetually overextended, we cannot be fully present anywhere. We become like a shallow pool of water spread too thin, unable to reflect clearly, unable to nourish deeply. But when we create conscious containers for our energy and attention, we become like a deep well, able to offer real sustenance to those who come to drink. Consider also the wisdom embedded in ancient spiritual traditions. The Sabbath, for instance, represents a profound boundary in time, sacred pause, a space where doing ceases and being can flourish. Similarly, meditation practices across cultures begin with establishing a boundary around a period of time and a space for practice. These traditions understand that without boundaries, the sacred cannot manifest. In our modern context, we must learn to create our own sacred boundaries in time and space. This might mean establishing digital Sabbaths, periods when we step away from the constant flow of information and demands. It might mean creating physical spaces in our homes where work is not allowed to intrude. It might mean setting clear temporal boundaries around our availability to others. But how do we begin this practice in a world that seems increasingly hostile to boundaries? Start with what I call the practice of the sacred pause. When a request comes, resist the immediate reflexive yes. Instead, take 3 conscious breaths. In the first breath, connect with your body's wisdom. What does it tell you about this request? In the second breath, connect with your values. Does this align with what matters most to you? In the third breath, connect with your heart's compassion. How can you respond with both clarity and kindness? Let us practice this together now. Think of a recent request that you habitually would have said yes to. Feel the familiar pressure, the urge to acquiesce. Now, breathe deeply and connect with what Michel Foucault called care of the self, not as self-indulgence, but as ethical practice. Feel the dignity in your right to say no. Consider these words: I hear your request, and I honor your need. At the same time, I must honor my own limits. I need to decline. Notice how different this feels from a guilty, apologetic no or an aggressive rejection. This is what Aristotle would call the golden mean, neither too yielding nor too rigid. This is the art of the conscious no, a no that comes not from fear or resentment, but from a place of self, knowledge, and self-respect. Remember that your no doesn't require justification or explanation. This is perhaps one of the hardest lessons to learn, especially for those of us conditioned to constantly explain and justify our needs. Your no is valid simply because it is your truth, as Alice Miller so powerfully articulated. The need to constantly justify our boundaries often stems from childhood experiences where our natural limits were not respected. In the workplace, this practice takes on particular importance. The myth of constant availability and unlimited capacity has created what sociologists call time poverty, a state where we are chronically short of time for rest, reflection, and genuine renewal. Learning to set professional boundaries isn't just about personal well-being. It's about creating sustainable work cultures. Consider the paradox that many organizations face. They claim to value creativity, innovation, and high performance, yet they create conditions that make these impossible by not respecting basic human needs for rest and regeneration. Your boundary setting practice becomes an act of leadership, showing others that it's possible to be both productive and human. Let me share with you what I call the 4 pillars of conscious boundary setting, drawn from both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. First, awareness, becoming exquisitely attuned to your own needs, limits, and values. Second, authenticity, ensuring your no comes from your truth, not from reaction or habit. Third, articulation, expressing your boundaries clearly and compassionately. Fourth, consistency, maintaining your boundaries with steady dedication. Think of boundary setting as a muscle that grows stronger with use. At first, it might feel uncomfortable, even painful. You might wobble like a toddler learning to walk, but with practice, with patience, with self-compassion, you'll develop what the ancient Greeks called hexis, a state of embodied wisdom, where your no flows naturally from your deep self-knowledge. Remember that you're not just setting boundaries for yourself, you're participating in a larger cultural transformation. Every time you honor your limits, you help create a world where others feel permission to honor theirs. You contribute to what anthropologist Margaret Mead called cultural transmission, the passing on of new, more conscious ways of being. Let us now explore the deeper dimensions of boundary, setting through the lens of what I call conscious relationship cultivation. This isn't just about saying no, it's about creating the conditions for authentic connection and meaningful engagement. As Martin Buber illuminated in his philosophy of I-thou relationships, true connection can only happen when both parties maintain their distinct identities while opening to genuine encounter. Consider the paradox that lies at the heart of intimacy. The closer we wish to be with others, the more essential clear boundaries become. Just as two hydrogen atoms must maintain their distinct electron configurations to form the water molecule that gives life, we must maintain our distinct selfhood to create living, breathing relationships. This is what the psychologist Murray Bowen called differentiation, the ability to be both connected and separate. Let me share with you the story of Marcus, a gifted therapist who came to me struggling with compassion fatigue. Like many helping professionals, he had internalized the belief that being available to others at all times was a measure of his dedication. His practice of boundary setting began with a radical recognition that his capacity to help others was directly proportional to his ability to replenish himself. Through our work together, Marcus developed what he called his sacred contract with himself and his clients. He learned to say, "I can be fully present with you during our sessions because I honor my need for rest and renewal between sessions." This wasn't just about time management. It was about energy stewardship, about maintaining the quality of presence that makes healing possible. This brings us to a crucial understanding about the relationship between boundaries and energy. In physics, we learn that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The same is true of human energy. When we fail to set boundaries, we don't actually create more energy for others. We simply deplete our own reserves until we have nothing meaningful left to give. Consider the wisdom embedded in Eastern philosophical traditions. The concept of kai or prana, life force energy, is always understood in terms of both flow and containment. A Taoist master would say that energy without proper containment dissipates. Like water without banks becomes a swamp rather than a river. Your boundaries are the banks that allow your life force to flow with power and purpose. In our modern context, this ancient wisdom takes on new urgency. We live in what sociologists call a high-demand environment, where the pressure to be constantly productive, constantly available, constantly engaging can feel overwhelming. Yet, as the philosopher Byung-Chul Han observes in his critique of our burnout society, this very lack of boundaries leads to a profound loss of meaning and authenticity. Let me introduce you to what I call the 3 circles of engagement, a practical framework for maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships. The inner circle represents your non-negotiable needs: sleep, basic self-care, time for reflection and renewal. The middle circle represents your close relationships and key commitments. The outer circle represents additional engagements that you choose consciously, not out of obligation. Think of these circles as permeable membranes, not rigid walls. The art lies in maintaining their integrity while allowing for appropriate flexibility. Sometimes an emergency in your outer circle might temporarily require more attention. The key is to recognize this as a temporary shift and to restore your boundaries once the emergency has passed. This brings us to what I call boundary restoration practice. Just as an immune system can be rebuilt after being compromised, our boundaries can be restored after being breached. This involves 3 steps: recognition, repair, and reinforcement. First, we must honestly acknowledge where our boundaries have eroded. Second, we must take concrete steps to repair the breach. Third, we must consciously reinforce our commitment to maintaining healthy limits. Consider how this plays out in professional contexts. Many organizations unconsciously create what psychologists call boundary, hostile environments. Cultures where being constantly available is seen as a sign of dedication. Your practice of conscious boundary setting becomes an act of cultural leadership. By maintaining healthy limits, you demonstrate that sustainable success requires respecting human needs and limitations. Let me share with you the wisdom of Lisa, a senior executive who transformed her organization's culture through conscious boundary setting. She began by making her own boundaries clear: no emails after 7 p.m., no meetings without clear agendas, no expectation of weekend availability except for true emergencies. At first, there was resistance, but gradually, her team began to notice something remarkable. Their creativity increased, their decision-making improved, and their job satisfaction soared. This points to a profound truth: boundaries are not just protective, they are generative. They create the conditions for innovation, depth, and authentic engagement. Think of how a tennis game requires lines on the court, how a piece of music requires measures and rests, how a painting requires a frame. These boundaries don't restrict creativity, they make it possible. In intimate relationships, this principle takes on even deeper significance. Many of us carry the wounded belief that love means absolute availability, that boundaries somehow indicate a lack of care. Yet, as the psychologist John Bowlby discovered in his research on attachment, secure relationships require both connection and autonomy. Your boundaries don't diminish your love, they create the space in which love can flourish. Consider what I call the paradox of presence. When we try to be available to everyone at all times, we end up being truly present to no one, including ourselves. But when we create conscious containers for our engagement, temporal, emotional, energetic boundaries, we can bring our full presence to each encounter. This is what meditation teachers mean when they speak of devoted attention. Let us explore what I call boundary linguistics, the art of expressing our limits clearly and compassionately. Notice the difference between these 2 statements: "I can't help you because I'm too busy," versus "I need to honor my existing commitments and energy limits." The first sounds apologetic and potentially invites argument. The second expresses a clear, self-respecting truth. This brings us to the crucial understanding that boundary setting is not just about saying no. It's about saying yes to your own deep truth. Every time you decline a request that doesn't align with your values or exceed your capacity, you're saying yes to your own integrity, yes to sustainable relationships, yes to authentic engagement with life. Remember the wisdom of the great psychologist Carl Rogers, who observed that the more we accept ourselves, including our limits and needs, the more we can truly accept and be present for others. Your boundaries are not walls that separate you from others. They are the foundation that makes genuine connection possible. As we move through this understanding, consider what the philosopher Pierre Hadot called spiritual exercises, practices that transform not just our actions, but our way of being in the world. Boundary setting is such a practice. Each conscious no, each clear limit, each honored need is an opportunity to grow in self-knowledge and self-respect. As we approach the culmination of our exploration together, let us turn our attention to what I call the integration phase, where boundary setting becomes not just a practice, but a way of being. This is where the philosophical meets the practical, where ancient wisdom transforms into lived experience. Let me share with you the story of Alina, a woman who embodied this integration in a way that profoundly moved me. After years of being what she called everyone's emergency contact, she began a conscious journey of boundary setting. What emerged wasn't just a more balanced life. It was a complete transformation in how she experienced herself and her relationships. Elena discovered what the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty called embodied wisdom. Her no longer came not from a place of guilt or fear, but from a deep listening to her body's wisdom. She learned to feel in her bones when a yes would nourish her and when it would deplete her. This is what the ancient Greeks called phronesis, practical wisdom that comes from lived experience. But Alina's journey also illuminates something crucial about the evolutionary nature of boundary setting. As she grew stronger in her practice, she discovered what I call the 3 levels of boundary mastery. The first level is protective, where we learn to say no to what depletes us. The second level is selective, where we learn to say yes only to what truly aligns with our values and energy. The third level is generative, where our boundaries become the foundation for creative engagement with life. Consider how this evolution mirrors what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. The initial refusal of demands that don't serve us is like the hero's departure from the ordinary world. The development of selective engagement is like the road of trials, where we learn discernment. The emergence of generative boundaries is like the return with the elixir, where our personal transformation becomes a gift to the community. This brings us to a profound truth about the relationship between boundaries and purpose. Every no that comes from authentic self-respect creates space for your unique contribution to the world. As the theologian Howard Thurman said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it." Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. In our modern context, this aliveness often requires what I call digital boundary wisdom. We must learn to navigate not just physical and emotional boundaries, but also the invisible boundaries of our digital lives. This means creating what the philosopher Luciano Floridi calls the on-life balance, a conscious integration of our online and offline existence. Let me share with you a practice I call the boundary audit. Take a moment each evening to reflect. Where did I honor my boundaries today? Where did I override them? What were the consequences? This isn't about judgment. It's about developing what Aristotle called practical wisdom, the ability to discern right action in specific circumstances. As we near our conclusion, I want to address what might be called the ecology of boundaries. Just as natural ecosystems require both connection and separation, our social ecosystems need both engagement and limits. Your boundary practice isn't just personal development. It's a contribution to the health of the whole system. Remember that mastery isn't perfection. There will be times when you falter, when old patterns reassert themselves. when fear or guilt temporarily override your wisdom. This too is part of the journey. As the Zen master Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's mind there are few." Maintain that beginner's mind, that openness to learning, even as you grow in confidence and skill. Let me offer you what I call the 7 commitments of conscious boundary setting. I commit to honoring my own needs as sacred. I commit to expressing my limits clearly and compassionately. I commit to respecting others' boundaries as I wish mine to be respected. I commit to viewing boundary setting as an act of love. I commit to maintaining flexibility without losing integrity. I commit to learning from my boundary violations rather than judging them. I commit to seeing my boundaries as a contribution to collective well-being. As you return to your daily lives, carry these commitments not as burdens but as beacons. Let them guide you toward what the philosopher Charles Taylor called the ethics of authenticity, a way of being that honors both individual truth and collective harmony. Remember that every time you honor your boundaries, you create ripples of possibility in the world. Every clear no makes space for an authentic yes. Every limit you maintain with grace helps others recognize and respect their own limits. You become what anthropologist Wade Davis calls a wayfinder, someone who helps chart the path toward a more conscious way of being. My beloved friends, as we conclude our time together, know that this is not an ending but a beginning. You carry within you now the seeds of a new way of being, one that honors both self and other, both limitation and possibility, both the personal and the universal. Go forth with courage, knowing that your boundaries are not just personal preferences. They are sacred containers for your life force, your purpose, your contribution to the world. Trust in your right to set limits, in your capacity to maintain them with grace, in your wisdom to know when to be firm and when to be flexible. And remember, whenever doubt arises, whenever the old patterns call to you, come back to your breath, to your body's wisdom, to your heart's knowing. Your no is sacred, your limits are holy, your boundaries are beautiful. In honoring them, you honor the divine spark within you and contribute to the healing of our world. Until we meet again, may you walk in wisdom, act with courage, and love yourself enough to say no when your heart guides you to do so. Namaste, my dear friends. Namaste.